when I need inspiration for crafts, I like to look at stores like Hobby Lobby, Joann Fabrics, Michaels, or I like to look at websites like Wayfair and Kirkland's. Today I have a bunch of fall projects for you, all inspired by things that I found from those stores. And by the way, what do you think of my new sign here? This is in my craft room and I love it. This is from Tailored Canvases. I'll talk a little more about them later, but for now, let's get crafting. The last time I was at Joann Fabrics, this wreath immediately caught my eye. I thought it was so neat how the raffia type ribbon was wrapped around two wreath forms, and I knew I could recreate it for myself. I got really lucky because at the Dollar Tree, they actually had wreath forms there that were already this sort of gold tan color. I had originally thought I'd have to pick up two green ones and spray paint them, but I was lucky enough to find this color instead. I took the two wreath forms and I laid one on top of the other so it kind of made a rounded shape to it, and I used some hot glue, and everywhere that there was a brace support part of the wreath, I added a dot of hot glue, and then I tied the two pieces together with a piece of jute twine. I did this around the whole circumference of the wreath, and it made it really secure and stable. And here you can see after I had all the pieces tied together, it gave a nice shape to the wreath form. I grabbed this ribbon. I couldn't find any type of raffia style ribbon that I really cared for, but I did find this ribbon at Michael's, and I liked the little pops of color from the leaves on this ribbon. This roll was 25 feet, and you'll be able to see here in a minute that I was not able to go the whole way around the wreath, which was fine because I knew I needed to add flowers in a couple sections anyway. I started by hot gluing the ribbon on the back of the wreath form and wrapping it around. I came up vertically in the back, and then as I came to the front, I shifted the ribbon so it would go on a diagonal. And I only added hot glue here and there, and I tried to make sure that when I was putting the hot glue down, I added just a small amount towards the back of the wreath form. Because this ribbon is on the thinner side, I didn't want to see any globs of hot glue peeking out through the front of the ribbon. I made my way around the wreath form going in this direction, and when there were only two sections left of the wreath form, that's when I decided to double back on itself, because this is when I realized I probably wasn't going to have enough ribbon to go the whole way around. So I stopped here. I didn't cut the ribbon, and I just wrapped it up the back side, and then I came back through the front going in the opposite directions. So it formed an X pattern on the front side of the wreath. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I mean about where I'm gluing the ribbon on the back side of the wreath form. So now that I'm zoomed in, you can see that I added a little glue to the bottom to hold it in place, and when I bring it up around the top, I made sure that it went in between the two pieces of ribbon that I had previously put on, and I diagonaled it down in the opposite direction and secured it in the bottom. Then I just kept wrapping in this direction until I got back to where I started. I gathered up some of my favorite fall leaves and clips of flowers and everything else I could find in my stash that I thought I might want on this wreath form. Now, because I did not have enough ribbon to cover those last two sections, I wanted to make sure that you couldn't see the wire very well through the flowers and pumpkins and everything that I was planning on adding. So I started by adding a base layer of fall leaves. I scattered about 4 or 5 leaves around the wreath form. I put a little hot glue to hold them in place, but then I did go back through with some jute twine and tied them on because I was afraid that the hot glue wouldn't be enough to keep these in place, and this was my base layer, so I wanted to make sure that they were really sturdy and secure. You could use floral wire here, but I was afraid that you would see the green floral wire. That was the only color I had on hand. I thought it would stand out a little too much, so that's why I decided to use jute twine instead. After I had my base layer of leaves and grass all tied down to the wreath form, I started working on the extra embellishments. Now, because my ribbon that I used did have a lot of color in it, I decided to keep my tones in my embellishments more on the neutral side, but I think this is where you could have fun with it. If you used just a plain ribbon wrapped around your wreath, you could really go for some bright fall colors when you're decorating. There's a lot of different ways you can customize this to fit your style. And to go along with my new wreath, I wanted a new wreath hanger. I saw this one on the Kohl's website and I thought it would be perfect to recreate. I grabbed a wreath hanger from the Dollar Tree and 2 packs of these metal words that they always have out for every holiday and every season. The words in the fall pack say harvest, thankful, and welcome. You could just use one of the words, but they are a little flimsy, so I decided to take 2 of the same word, which I decided to use thankful, and I used some E6000 glue, and I just glued the 2 words together to make it a little more sturdy. Then I used the same E6000 glue and I glued it to the front of the wreath hanger. I added in a clip and I set it to dry overnight. The next day, I gave the wreath hanger a good coat of this spray paint by Rust-Oleum in the color gold, and I love how the wreath hanger and my new wreath look on my new front door. Pier 1 website had these really cute hinged pumpkins on sale for fall, and I knew that the Dollar Tree sold similarly shaped pumpkins. They've actually had these out for a couple of years now, and I have quite a few in my stash that I've been collecting, so I thought this would be the perfect project to use these. I only had 3 orange ones, and I did have 1 white one, which was okay because I knew I was either going to have to cover these or repaint them anyway. I wanted to make sure that the edges of the pumpkins were all the same, so around the outside of the pumpkins, I just gave them a coat of white chalk paint. Rather than sanding the glitter off the front of the pumpkins, I decided to cover mine with some scrapbook paper. I had a piece of orange paper in my stash that was a little variated in color, and I was easily able to trace all 4 pumpkins on one sheet of 12 by 12 paper. Once I had the basic shape of the pumpkin cut out, then I used my art glitter glue, which is my favorite glue whenever I'm doing any kind of cardstock project. I glued it to the front of each pumpkin. I used my sanding block to remove the excess paper off around the edges. This did 2 things. 1, I didn't have to cut the paper, I just sanded it off, and 2, it did give it a slight distressing around the edges, which is something that I really like in my projects. One thing to remember when you're sanding paper off of a project like this is that you want to just go downward over the project. You don't want to move the sandpaper or the sanding block back and forth over the project because you run the risk of actually lifting the paper back up off of the surface. So just make sure you're just going in one direction with the sandpaper and always go downward, because then you're using the corner of the project to actually help cut that paper as well. Because these pumpkins will be sitting right next to each other, I wanted the edges of each one to be slightly more defined. I grabbed one of my Tim Holtz distressed inks. This is the color Gathered Twigs. I'm using a sponge dauber just to daub it around the edges of the pumpkin. After I had the edges on the front side of the pumpkin, I did run a little more ink around the outside edge of the pumpkin too, because I do really like that distress look. If you don't have ink to distress with, you could absolutely use paint or even some kind of stain or wax. Instead of using metal hinges to connect my pumpkin, I grabbed a pack of this faux leather that you can find in the Dollar Tree. They have a section that carries materials that could be used with a Cricut, but this is one of the items that you absolutely don't need a Cricut for. I cut 1 strip of the leather 1 inch wide, then I cut it down into 1 inch squares, and I needed 6 squares altogether. Before gluing the leather onto my pumpkins, I needed to create a small gap in between each of the pumpkins. I'm just using a simple craft stick here. I dropped it in between the 2 pumpkins so that it would leave, I don't even think it's 1/8 of an inch. It just needed to be small enough so that I could bend the pumpkins if I wanted to position them a little bit different. I'm using hot glue here to attach the little leather squares in between each of the pumpkins. I would have liked to have used some nails as well, but I didn't have any small enough on hand to pound into the corners. You can see how easily it folds here. But I think I might go back the next time I'm at Lowe's or another home improvement store like that. I'm going to buy some tiny little nails and I'm going to pound them into each of the corners of the leather to make it look more like hinges. The poster stickers that you can find at the Dollar Tree would be really perfect for on these pumpkins. I didn't have any on hand, but I do have a Cricut, so I decided to cut out the letters for the word fall using my Cricut, and I placed one letter on each pumpkin. For the embellishments on my pumpkins, I just tied a simple jute bow on the top of each of the stems. Then I decorated each pumpkin with a variety of green leaves and floral picks that I already had in my stash. I have been working hard to get my craft room more organized and more decorated. One thing that has made a big difference is this big beautiful canvas from tailoredcanvases.com. Tailored Canvases has such a variety of artwork for any room in your house, and they also have a big selection for the different holidays. They work with amazing artists to create personalized canvases to suit your needs. All of the canvases are created and shipped from right here in the United States. When I received my canvas, I was so impressed with how well it was packaged to ship, and once I got it open, I was blown away by the quality of the canvas. I was expecting a typical stretched canvas on a wooden frame, but I was wrong. Tailored canvases are wrapped over a solid front panel that won't allow for any sagging or denting. The canvas comes ready to hang with hinged hangers mounted on the back, and it is lightweight enough I was able to hang mine by myself with no problems. Even my husband was really impressed with the quality and sturdiness of the canvas. Another thing I really appreciated about Tailored Canvases is that I was able to see a preview of my personalized canvas after they finished designing it. I received an email to view my canvas, and I had to give my approval before they shipped it out. The canvases are wrapped on a base that is 1 1/4 inch wide, and each canvas comes in a variety of sizes to fit wherever you need it. The website is very easy to navigate. You can search by room, holidays, interests, or just look at what their best sellers are if you need a little inspiration. We are going to be doing a mini makeover to our laundry room, and I already have my eye on a few of the canvases that I'll be putting into that room. And I love that they have several designs in the farmhouse style because, you know, that's how I love to decorate. With the holidays coming up soon, I think these personalized canvases would make amazing gifts for friends, family, and loved ones. I will leave a link to Tailored Canvases in my description box below, along with a coupon code you can use to receive 15% off of your order. Thank you again to tailoredcanvases.com for sponsoring this part of the video. Now let's get back to crafting. When I saw this piece of box art at Michael's, I knew that I had to recreate it for myself because I thought it was so cute. The Dollar Tree came out with these wooden hanging signs this year, and they're both about pie, which is perfect for this sign. I grabbed one of these wooden signs from the Dollar Tree, and even though I like the wood grain in the background, I decided to give mine a light coat of white paint. After my paint was dry, I picked out which pie I wanted. I decided to go with the whole pie for my sign. I hot glued it to the center of the sign. Then I used my Cricut to print out the words I needed for the quote, "All you need is love and pie." Of course, if you don't have a Cricut or a vinyl cutting machine, you could just use letter stickers, or I know a lot of you are really great at hand lettering, which I am not, which is why I always rely on my Cricut. Now, the one tip I will have, if you find this same square wooden sign at the Dollar Tree, I don't know why, but for some reason they have the rope hanger going from the front to the back, and it makes it really hard to hang this sign. So I just switched it around. I took the rope hanger out and I weaved it in from the back to the front, and it made it a lot easier to hang this up. If you're enjoying this video so far, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a big thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel if you haven't already. And if you are on social media, I am on Instagram at GlueLaLa. I have 3 more crafts for you, so let's get to it. When I saw this leaf garland at Hobby Lobby, I knew it would take no time for me to recreate it for myself. I grabbed a pack of the burlap leaves from the Dollar Tree and I gave them a quick coat of this metallic gold spray paint. I used one of these shelves from the Dollar Tree, and I wrapped the wire stem of the leaf around the shelf to make the spray painting easier. The spray painting, of course, was not necessary, but I really like the gold sheen that it gave to these burlap leaves. In addition to those, I'm also going to use a pack of the faux leather leaves that they came out with, some mini clothespins, and of course the rope. Whenever I make a rope garland, I always like to finish off the end. So I measured about 2 inches down. I added some hot glue to the end, held it in place, and then I just used a scrap piece of ribbon, wrapped it around where I had glued it to give it a nice finished edge. And I did that on both ends of the rope. I found the center of the rope, and that's where I clipped on my first leaf. I didn't bother using any hot glue to attach these leaves. I thought the clothespins did a good enough job on their own. The reason I started in the center is because then that way I didn't really have to measure when I was placing the other leaves. I just kind of eyeballed it. I'd clip on another leaf and then go to the other side and line the next one up with that one, and I just went until I got to the end of the garland. I love how this one turned out, and I really loved that it was a quick and easy craft. If you have some scrapbook paper in your stash that you've been wanting to use, these cube pumpkins are a great way to do that. There's a bunch of different things you can get from the Dollar Tree that are in the shape of a cube, or you could even use scrap wood if you have that on hand. I grabbed 2 of the wood cubes from the Dollar Tree and also 2 of these decorative drawers. And of course, the wood cubes had not only a label on the back with the UPC code, but a sticker on the other side. So I did use my heat gun to remove both of those before I started painting. I love adding pops of teal or blue into my fall decor, so I grabbed this agave color by Waverly, and I painted one of the smaller cubes and one of the bigger cubes this teal color. And of course, I do like the traditional pumpkin color, so for the other 2 cubes I painted those orange. The scrapbook paper I'm using is part of this collection called Fall is in the Air by Echo Park. I've already used some of this paper, and I knew I had some scraps, so I figured that would be a good way to use up those scraps. Now, my pumpkins are going to probably be a little bit different in measurements than yours are, depending on what type of boxes or cubes that you use. But what I did is I measured my cubes and boxes, and whatever the measurement was, I'm cutting my squares down to a 1/4 inch shorter. So for instance, the smaller wooden cubes that I'm using measured 2 1/4 by 2 1/4. So I'm cutting my paper down to 2 by 2. And the bigger drawers that I'm using measured 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. So I measured my papers down to 2 1/2 inches by 2 1/2 inches. I only cut 5 squares for each cube because one of the sides of the cube will be on the bottom, and I didn't think I needed a piece of paper for that side. After all my squares were cut out, then I got to work gluing them onto my cubes and boxes. Now, because I did cut the squares down a 1/4 inch shy from the actual measurements, once I glued them in place, it left a nice border of that paint color around the outside. To make these cubes look more like pumpkins, they needed a stem, so I grabbed a bag of these wood stems from the Dollar Tree, and I'm using my miter shears to cut these down. This is a really cool tool. I got this a couple years ago, and it comes in really handy in the craft room. It cuts through the twigs pretty easily, and I've also cut through skewers, and I even managed to cut through a tumbling tower block before with these. Once I had all the stems cut down to the size that I liked, I hot glued them to the top of each cube, and I got to work decorating each of the pumpkins. I added in some leaves and pieces of greenery that I had in my stash, and then as a finishing touch, I just tied a simple jute bow and glued it to the front of each pumpkin. Kirkland's is one of my favorite websites to go to when I need some inspiration for crafting. I love how this sign looked, and I knew I could recreate it for myself. I'm using a 9 by 12 canvas that I got on clearance at Michael's, but you could use one of the 8 by 10 canvases that you can find at the Dollar Tree as well. I removed all of the canvas material from the front of the frame. I took the excess material off the back, but I didn't bother removing the staples because I knew they wouldn't be in my way. One of my favorite ways to add color to a wood frame like this is to use the Antique Wax by Waverly. I like to apply the wax with a wet wipe because as I'm applying it, I'm also removing the excess all in one step. The Kirkland sign had wooden leaves attached to the wood bead garland at the top of the sign. These harvest pins from the Dollar Tree are perfect for that. I didn't care for the design that's at the top of them, so I painted over the design with 2 coats of green chalk paint. After my paint was all dry, I used a black paint pen to draw the veins in on these leaves. Normally, I would have just glued the canvas material back to the back of the frame, but the reason this frame was on clearance is because the canvas material is actually damaged on this. So instead of using the material, I'm just hot gluing on a piece of white cardstock. To create the wood bead garland at the top of the picture, I took a piece of jute twine and I strung my beads on first, and I knew I'd need 2 sets of beads in between each of the leaves. So I strung on a natural bead, a gray bead, and another natural one. And these leaves do have clips on the back, but they still kind of flopped around on the string. So once I had them in place, I did add a dab of hot glue to the inside of the little mini clothespin so that I could glue the leaves in place on the jute. Instead of hot gluing the wood bead garland directly to the inside of the frame, I hot glued the outer leaves to the frame itself so that it could hang down. I know the Kirkland sign said "Welcome Friends" at the bottom, but I know not everyone has a Cricut to be able to cut out those sayings. So I actually grabbed a pack of the window clings from the Dollar Tree that had a bunch of different ones on it with different fall sayings. I grabbed one that I knew would fit well inside the frame, and I'm just using a little bit of Mod Podge to apply it to the front. Thanks for coming to hang out and craft with me today. Let me know in the comments which one of these projects was your favorite, and also let me know what stores or websites you like to go to for inspiration. And don't forget to check out the description box for the link to tailored canvases, and use my code GLUELALA15 to get 15% off of your purchase. If you want even more fall inspiration, check out the videos that I left linked on the screen. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye!